And welcome everybody to another off-season edition of the Assembly Call. This is Andy Bottoms. I'll be hosting tonight because while Ryan likes to give me a hard time about missing these shows for my kids' sporting events and other things like that, Jared has missed the show for the birth of his child. So he's upped the ante on all of us for reasons to not be here. So we're all anxiously awaiting the news of Jared and Heather's new little one that should be here soon. So definitely will wish him the best. I'm sure he'll have plenty of time where he's not sleeping to listen to this in the coming days as we go through it. But without Jared, we do have Will DeWitt here with us. As usual, Ryan Phillips could not be here at the last minute either. A medical situation there, so all of our best to his dad, Dr. Phillips. Hopefully he's getting better as well. And so even though Podcast on the Brink is taking a brief hiatus, we decided we would not let Alex Bozich off quite that easy, and so he's here to join us tonight. We're going to talk, in large part, just a quick early look at the Big Ten, how that's shaping up. At this point, rosters should be largely finalized. You know, the draft decisions and all that has far passed. A few late transfers will surely trickle in here and there, but at this point, I think we got a pretty good idea of what the rosters are going to look like. So we'll take a quick look at that. I saw some folks posted a Bleacher Report article from, I think it was yesterday, that kind of broke down the Big Ten. So we'll take it in a similar order. I think my order is slightly different, but we'll kind of talk through a couple IU topics quickly to start, and then delve into the rest of the Big Ten as we try to work our way through the offseason. So with that, we would normally start with the banner moment. I don't know that there's anything here that about what I'm about to say that speaks to IU hanging a six banner, but certainly the birth of one's first child is a banner moment in anyone's life, as Alex and I can attest, I'm sure. And so, congrats again to Jared and Heather, and we'll look forward to having him back on the show. Hopefully in a couple weeks, we'll see if he's bleary-eyed and awake by the time we do the show here in 2 weeks. But definitely best of luck to them. Will, anything for you to add? I know your summer is kind of wrapping up a little bit before classes start here in Bloomington. What's going on with you?
Hey, not too much. Just came back. I worked the Indiana High School Journalism Institute for the past 2.5 weeks, shaping the young journalists' minds for, Indiana. It's pretty much like a recruiting tool, but for like journalists, which is pretty cool. But I got to tour the new media school at Franklin Hall. Really cool stuff in there. I mean, the technology is just like mind-boggling to say the least. But yeah, summer's going well. Between working on Assembly Call and the Bears Brothers, staying busy. But class starts in a month. Not really looking forward to it. Senioritis is already kind of setting in. If that's even the thing in college. I just remember that from high school. But definitely setting in. Just kind of ready to graduate by now, but I'm excited for another school year, to say the least.
I would urge you to cling to those days in college as long as you possibly can. So and enjoy it. Alex, how about you? How's the off season? Although covering IU basketball, I don't know that there's a true off season, but at least the non-playing season going for you.
Yeah, it's going pretty well. Thanks, guys, for having me. I always make it a habit to check the show out, so I appreciate the opportunity to join. Looking forward to the season actually getting started, though. Having some actual basketball to write about rather than just kind of guessing how things are going to play out here. So that's going to be a lot of fun. Also, looking forward to getting a chance to check out the Assembly Hall renovations when that's all done. Although, that's not expected to be all completed here until a little bit further into the fall. But all in all, it's been a good off-season, good quiet off-season as far as the off-court news, so can't complain about that either.
All right. Well, let's kind of jump in with a IU topic or two here first. We'll maybe touch on their schedule a little bit as we get into the Big Ten piece of things. But Jared brought this up when we were talking about topics, and I think it's a good one. We've spent a good part of the offseason talking about the newcomers, inclusive of Josh Newkirk and the sophomores to be with Thomas and OG and Juwan. But three of the guys who are going to be really important to this team are the veterans, if you will, the Colin Hartman, Robert Johnson, and James Blackman Jr. trio there. So, I think it's probably important we talk a little bit about what their roles are going to be. But I guess first let's talk health. Each of those three guys is coming off of some type of off-season surgery. Alex, what, if any, things have you heard about how each of their recoveries is going so far?
Well, Hartman didn't have surgery, just as you know, had the cast, so he's going to I assume be 100% by the start of practice. I believe he's been doing mostly everything in the off-season workouts. Robert Johnson, to my knowledge, has been a little bit slower as far as the recovery, but his injury was a little bit more significant in that he had to have surgery. And also James Blackman Jr., who I've heard is progressing really well, but they're taking things slow with him just because there's no reason in July to push things too far when you're really 4 months away from playing a meaningful game. But to my knowledge, from people that have seen off-season workouts, the expectation is that all three are looking like they're trending in the right direction and should be available for the start of practice. So not anticipating any lingering injury issues going into the season, which will be a nice thing for Indiana to have.
Well, Andy, I think you're still muted real quick. But I could go ahead and go real quick. I have a question.
That I am. Go ahead.
Good? You're good? Okay, I'll ask real quick. All right, so I recently read an article, I think it was from ESPN about a week ago, and they talked about like the most clutch players on each of the top 25 teams. And they had JBJ down for the most clutch player on our team and the guy you want taking that last second shot. I want to know, do you agree with that? Do you think, is he the guy on this roster who you want with the ball in their hands like with 10 seconds to go?
I would have to say Thomas Bryant, just given how efficient he was last year and his ability to draw fouls. Obviously, if you need a three-point shot, you're not going to go to him. But I would say Bryant, based on everything I saw last season, as being the most important player for Indiana and also the most clutch player going into the season. So I think it's going to be huge to see how Blackman is and as far as his health and his defense this year. He's going to be arguably maybe IU's leading scorer going into the season, but I don't necessarily agree with calling him the most clutch player considering he didn't play any conference game last year.
Yeah, when we talk about roles, Hartman is the lone senior on the roster. Do you see his role expanding much from what he provided last year? He's been asked to do a few different things over these last couple of seasons. I mean, what kind of role do you see him settling into based on the other personnel on this year's team?
Yeah, it's interesting with him. I think he's a guy that really needs to have a kind of a bounce back year from a three-point shooting perspective. One of the things I wrote about today when I looked at kind of like Thomas Bryant's efficiency was, if you look at last season, one of the reasons he was able to be so efficient was he had Troy Williams next to him playing the floor, a guy that could give him space. This year, I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities still for Bryant to have space on the floor, but Hartman's got to be a guy that can, if he's going to play the floor at all, which I think he will sometimes, is going to be able to have to make three-point shots, and last year he wasn't as good in that regard. As far as his on-court leadership role, I feel like he's always been a guy who's been a pretty solid leader on the court. Maybe not vocal leader, but as far as fundamentals and kind of directing guys where to be and kind of just playing the game the right way, playing smart, he's always kind of led by example in that regard. So I don't really think there's going to be a huge adjustment for him, but as far as the on-court vocal leader stuff, I think this is going to be really Thomas Bryant's team as far as getting guys kind of in line on the court. I think he did some of that a little bit last year, and even though there are some other upperclassmen on the team, with Yogi being gone, I feel like Bryant really has a chance to step up into that role, and when you're the team's best player, you kind of lead by example, and I think it's going to be a huge opportunity in that regard for Bryant to do that. But, I do think Hartman is a guy that's well respected by his teammates, and he will, Indiana doesn't have official captains, but he's going to be one of the quote-unquote leaders of this team, I feel like.
And then shifting to Rojo and James Blackman Jr., obviously I think the biggest question this year is, how does IU via committee replace what Yogi brought? Where do you see those two fitting in terms of, are there certain portions of what Yogi brought to the team that you think one, let's say ball handling, does it become a 75-25 split between those guys? Or how do you see some of those things that Yogi brought, shaken out between the two of them who are certainly the most experienced and will be asked to take on a lot of what Yogi did, even if it's, maybe asking two guys to fill the role of one?
Yeah, one of them's got to prove that they can be a primary ball handler. I don't think either one has to this point. I think Robert Johnson probably has the best chance to do it, but he's been a little bit too turnover prone his first 2 years. If neither one of those guys proves that they can do it, I think there's going to be a strong chance that you're going to see Josh Newkirk take on a bigger role in the backcourt and maybe start alongside those two guys in kind of a three-guard set. So I think the biggest thing for Blackman is obviously the defense. I'm sure you guys have talked about that for months and months, going back to the Duke game and then throughout the conference season. We'll see how he kind of responds to being criticized in the offseason, and is he going to come and embrace that? I think he will. Robert Johnson, he's coming back from a pretty significant injury, but he's got to really prove that, like I said, he can be more decisive on the floor. I feel like a lot of times his first couple of years, with Yogi out there too, he kind of got stuck between, do I try to set other guys up or do I just kind of take on more of a scoring role? I think his role will be a little bit more defined this year. He's going to have a little bit more freedom to make plays for himself and his teammates. But if he's going to be IU's primary point guard or primary ball handler, he's going to have his turnovers, I think, come down quite a bit. Otherwise, I think you'll see a lot more Josh Newkirk handling the ball.
All right, and the other thing that has started to take shape a little bit more is the schedule for this year. We'll talk the Big Ten schedule when we get into that section of the show. But as far as the non-conference schedule, a bit more of that was revealed this week. I know you wrote a post on it. Feels a little bit, from my perspective, like it's kind of a feast or famine, where you've either got some teams that are really good, so the Kansases and Butlers, North Carolina, those kinds of teams that we know are on the schedule, and then a lot of the Mississippi Valley States kind of low-end teams. Just kind of give people a brief, if they haven't read, what you put together, a brief overview of what we know so far and what's yet to be announced.
Yeah, it's like you said, feast or famine. I mean, the high points are obviously the home game with North Carolina, which is going to be obviously an incredible atmosphere. You got the Louisville game at Bankers Life on New Year's Eve, which should be another great game. Butler at Bankers Life Fieldhouse in the Crossroads Classic, and then Kansas, the Armed Force Classic on Veterans Day to kind of open the season. Those are really the high points. And you've also got the IPFW game, which should be pretty solid up in Fort Wayne. A good chance for fans in that part of the state to get a chance to watch Indiana play. But after that, like you said, it's really kind of bottom of the barrel in terms of the opponents. I mean, Southeast Missouri State, sub 300 team. UMass Lowell, I think, is pretty low as well. Mississippi Valley State and Liberty. I mean, those are kind of the 9 that we know at this point. I think there's going to be 4 more, and if I'm guessing what the other 4 are going to be, it's going to be more towards the lower end teams than the higher end. Usually what we've seen in the past is 4 or 5 pretty good non-conference game, and the rest kind of fill out your home schedule. That's unfortunately, I think the nature of the beast in college basketball right now is these guarantee games in every program. I know a lot of IU fans like to grumble and complain, and I don't blame them. If you're paying that much for season tickets and you've got 8 or 9 games that are just absolute, pretty much exhibitions where the other team's going to get run off the floor, it's a lot to ask somebody to pay $30-$40 a pop and parking and the time to go watch that. But these programs have to schedule home dates, essentially. They're buying the other team to come there, paying them a certain amount of money with no guarantee of a return game to their venue. So, I think the rest of the schedule, unless they're barring some unforeseen development that we haven't heard, which this late in the summer I wouldn't expect it to be any marquee opponent, that's pretty much going to be the meat of the schedule, is those 4 or 5 games being really good and then everything else kind of being towards the bottom. I think if there's one valid complaint there, I would like to see maybe more games like in the 150 to 200 range, maybe some in-state teams, maybe some teams more in the Midwest, this part of the country. I mean, there's just no natural draw for, fans to want to see Mississippi Valley State or UMass Lowell or Liberty. Some of these programs there's just nobody to get excited about. Maybe if you had some teams maybe from the Midwest or even bordering states where teams where fans kind of had at least a little bit of familiarity with the programs, they could generate a little bit of excitement. And obviously, you don't like to see the teams with the RPI over 300 because it just does really nothing for your profile, as you know.
Yep. Well, I mean, I guess that's a good segue, Zane. Well, one quick thing to kind of touch on there, the College Basketball Talk podcast that Rob Doster does, and I think Raphael Johnson was on with them this last time. I think they had one come out recently. They talked a lot about some of the non-conference scheduling issues some of these schools face. Talk a little bit about some of the financial aspect that you referenced, Alex. I think that's kind of a good listen. People I agree with the frustration of what people are paying for tickets. It does give some view into it. I fall in your camp though of like you could probably do a little bit better and still get winnable games that that aren't gonna hurt you in the end. But probably as good a segue as any to our sponsor for tonight, which is SeatGeek. So obviously a little bit early to start thinking about basketball tickets, but football season is quickly closing in. Places, certainly Cincinnati is not one of them, but pennant races are starting to heat up in baseball. Concert season still got a little bit of ways to go. And so if you're looking for tickets, we would certainly recommend everybody check out SeatGeek. We've talked about this before. I know Jared and I have both had positive experiences and shared those with everybody. Really takes some of the confusion out of the ticket buying process. Straightforward pricing. You understand what you're going to get the minute you look at the tickets, and it has a deal rater that lets you understand for that venue, for that game, are you getting a good deal? Are you getting the most for your money? And so they do those price comparisons, pull everything together, and give you a chance to get the tickets you want at a good price. So if you want to take advantage of the deal that we can get you through the assembly call, just go to the SeatGeek app, go to the settings tab and add a promo code, and then enter the promo code assembly. And after you make your first purchase, SeatGeek will send you $20 as a reward to you for doing that. Also helps the show out, and again, something that we really support and believe in the product that SeatGeek has, and how easy they make it for everybody to buy tickets. So as the summer comes to a close and you're looking for tickets for any of the sporting events or concerts that are coming up, make sure you use SeatGeek and use the promo code assembly. So with that, we will dive into the Big Ten, and I did this I tried to tier the teams out a little bit as best I could, and where I thought they fit in. There was a Bleacher Report article I think I referenced earlier that came out yesterday, I believe. I think it did some similar tiering. I probably have a couple extra that maybe I don't need, but kind of group these teams together and touch on, in some cases more than one question, but at least one question that we think is pertinent for each team. So what better place to start than Rutgers, which, as I said before we started, is really going to drive the downloads of this one. Alex asked in the chat if there was a separate Rutgers tier. I've chosen to put them in with others, and we'll see how it goes. So, they're the only team in the league that has a new coach. I don't really count Greg Gard in that, although he has become the permanent coach. So they've got Steve Peichel from Stony Brook, who had a good season there, got them to the tournament. But they don't have, well, they do have 4 guys who come back that averaged in double figures last year, one of them in limited action. They don't have anybody that has an offensive rating over 100 that's returning from the team. So I guess the best question is there any reason to believe that they don't finish last in the league again this year?
Will, do you want to take that, or do you want me to chime in?
I mean, I can take that. I can say no, and then we can move on, right?
There you go. We'll both say no. No, I think here's the only thing I'll say about Rutgers. I think Corey Sanders is fun to watch sometimes. That's about really the only reason to watch a Rutgers game at this point, or if they're playing Indiana from an IU fan perspective. But that's going to be a long road ahead for Steve Peichel. I hope he's being compensated well. We'll leave it at that.
Yeah, they do have a few guys there. Just the depth and the overall talent level isn't there. I know you did a piece, I think it was yesterday, on recruiting and incoming classes, and they just, they've got some guys coming in, but they don't rank very high, and they just need so much help. It's not really a great place to start. So we'll quickly move on to Minnesota, which I think the range of outcomes for them is pretty wide. There's a couple teams like this I'd say that there probably are. I think from a talent perspective, they've got a lot of newcomers. In some cases that could be good. So they've got some transfers. They've got Amir Coffey, who's one of the guys you highlighted, I think it was last week, on a list of 5 impact newcomers in the league. So they've got a lot of new pieces to fit together. Nate Mason is still there. Jordan Murphy played pretty well last year. So they've got a couple guys there. But Patino's on the hot seat, and he's 16 and 38 in league play over the last 3 years. So I think he's on the hot seat, rightfully so, for that. There's some off-court issues, particularly with, I think, Reggie Lynch. I know Lynch is the last name, transfer from Illinois State. So his status for this season is up in the air. How do you, I guess, talk a little bit about Amir Coffey, kind of what made you select him, and how do you think he fits in among all those other new pieces in Minnesota?
Well, my basis for including him was basically, Minnesota does not have a lot of elite top-level talent, so anytime they bring in a player who's a consensus top 50 player, that is automatically going to raise some eyebrows from, just the standpoint of this isn't a player that typically goes to Minnesota. Amir Coffey's from Minnesota, though. Richard Pitino was able to sell him on probably the fact of staying home and also the playing time that he could offer him right away. So I would expect, just reasonably thinking about this, that if Richard Pitino wants to keep his job beyond this year, even if they're not going to win a lot of games this year, you play young guys, and he brought in a pretty solid recruiting class. So you play these young guys and you try to sell people on, one more year. I think his buyout's pretty substantial too. So it's no guarantee that he's gone after this season. Amir Coffey is a 6'7" wing guy that can really score and shoot. He's based on the opportunity that he's going to have, he's going to be able to put up some numbers. Will he be efficient right away with kind of the talent that's around him? I'm not necessarily sure on that. I think Minnesota's still got some problems as far as their big guy situation. Lynch was going to be a big part of that, but the off-season or the off-court problems are kind of still lingering there. If he can't play, I think that's a pretty significant loss. But Minnesota did upgrade. I feel like overall their talent level, will that translate into significantly more Big Ten wins? I don't necessarily believe so, but I think they're going to be better than they were last year, which was pretty bad.
That is a fair assessment, I would say. Nebraska is the other team I had in this lower tier, and a lot of that has to do with the late transfer of Andrew White. They were already losing Siobhan Shields, and so without those two guys, they've only got two guys back that scored over 5 points a game last year. With White leaving so late, there really wasn't a way to recruit for anybody to replace him. I think they signed a JUCO guy to fill his scholarship, but they seem poised to take a pretty big step back, and I think that Bleacher Report piece even picked them to finish last. Do you see anybody on that roster that can pick up some of that scoring slack, or are they just going to be in a world of hurt this year?
Yeah, I was actually, when I did my off-season power rankings back in late May after the NBA draft deadline, at the time Andrew White was coming back, or we thought he was coming back to Nebraska. I was actually a little higher on them than a lot of people. I had him 8th. I thought Andrew White was going to be an all Big Ten type player next year. And, I liked the fact that they were adding Anton Gill, who's an athletic guard who transferred from Louisville, former top 50 recruit, maybe with a change of scenery and a better situation for him in Lincoln. He would be another guy that they would have on the perimeter that can score. Now, as you mentioned, they lose their best player, undoubtedly, in White. I think, I don't know that I would pick them to finish 12th, but I would definitely have them in my bottom 4 or 5 at this point. They do have some young, nice player. I think Glenn Watson's, a promising young point guard. Their 2 front court players, Jack McVeigh and Michael Jacobson, showed some promise at times last year, but without White, that's a pretty big piece of production to replace this late in the game, and I definitely do see them kind of in that bottom tier of the Big Ten at this point based on his departure.
All right, so kind of move to my next tier. I don't know if I have a great order for these teams, but I'll do Northwestern first. So the tournament drought continued last year. I think people had high hopes coming in. They lost Vic Law before the season. So now, much to the delight of IU fans, Trey Demps is finally gone. Alex Ola is gone, but Law is back from injury, and so they've got a decent core of guys there. But when you really look at the things that they did from an efficiency standpoint, I think Demps and Ola were a pretty big part of those. Demps had a really low turnover rate. Ola was good on the glass. Shot twos well. So it's hard to try to figure out how they overcome that. Will, what are your thoughts on Northwestern as we head into this year?
Obviously, I think they're going to have a tough time replacing both Demps and Ola right now. Law can only do so much, but that could just be me. Alex, what do you think? I really think they are going to have a tough time this season.
Yeah, the biggest thing for me isn't Demps, it's Ola. Who's their big man? They got Derek Pardon, who's had a couple of good games when he took the red shirt off last year and then kind of faded. They got a freshman, Barrett Benson, who I saw quite a bit on the AAU circuit that can play a little bit. I think his dad played at Purdue, so he's got some, he's got some talent. He's a top 150 recruit, but there's some really good big men in the Big Ten, and Alex Ola, I feel like was a little bit underrated. He wasn't a great athlete. He wasn't explosive, but he could score in a variety of ways. He could at least assert himself a little bit in the paint. I think their backcourt situation is actually going to be pretty good with Bryant McIntosh, who I like quite a bit. I think Vic Law's got a chance to be a really good wing player. I don't know that this is the year that Northwestern makes the tournament, but I actually do think that they've improved their overall talent level. They've got a couple of, like I said, nice top 150 recruits. They did lose Demps and Ola, but they really never won anything with those guys either. I mean, they were just kind of middle of the road with those two guys. So maybe, kind of adding Law and Bryant McIntosh being a year older kind of gives Northwestern a chance to make a little bit of a jump. And I wouldn't put it totally out of the question.
All right, let's talk Penn State. They lose Brandon Taylor, who led them in scoring and rebounding, but they had a really good recruiting class. I think they're around, at the 247 rankings, I think they're around 30th or so. A couple guys that were on the IU radar, at least for some period of time, and Tony Carr and Lamar Stevens. And they've got 6 guys back who played double-digit minutes last year. Now, not a lot of those guys scored very well. And that's, how much do you think those freshmen can elevate what Penn State's doing, and are they potentially? They feel kind of like people talking about them now the way that we talked about Northwestern a little bit before last season. But do you think that's realistic? That those guys can really kind of elevate them a decent amount above where they were last year?
Yeah, they still don't have good shooting overall. Tony Carr is a really good point guard who I saw quite a bit on the AU trail, a former IU target, I think a top 50, top 60-ish guy. He should be pretty good, but they already have Shep Garner in the backcourt, so that's going to be interesting to kind of see how that works. Lamar Stevens is a freshman that they're adding, who is kind of an undersized 4-man, but plays really hard, really physical and aggressive. I think he'll get on the court right away. And they've got another kid by the name of Watkins, I believe, who sat out last year due to academic problems. That was also a top 100 recruit. So that's a pretty substantial upgrade in talent. With them, I kind of look at, they lost Brandon Taylor, but if you look at Brandon Taylor, he wasn't necessarily an efficient player or a guy that would have been your best player on a regular year. He's like a good 3rd or 4th player if you're a pretty good team. He was Penn State's best player last year, kind of by necessity. But Penn State, they've done a good job getting into Philadelphia. Credit to Pat Chambers there. I've always liked his energy, his passion for the program, and that's not an easy place to win. I went to an IU Penn State game up there. I want to say it was the Vonleh year. I think Indiana won. I think Etherington hit like a corner 3 kind of late in the game to kind of win that game and stave off disaster. And that place was like going to a funeral. I mean, there was absolutely no atmosphere in there. So, overall, I like Penn State to maybe move up a little bit this year. They've got, like I said, some talented guys coming in. I still think shooting's a problem. They don't have a great big man either, but I think overall they're one of the programs that's significantly upgraded their talent level this offseason. They should be able to compete and maybe get into that middle tier of the league.
Yeah, I think the couple of things you referenced there at the end were a couple of things that stuck out to me. One is just size. They don't have a whole lot of guys that are over 6'6". They've got some decent wing guys, but they don't have a lot of height. And then, shooting. I think I wrote down they have one guy back that shot over 32% from three-point range last year. So while the talent level, I think, gets better, you look at the efficiency numbers, there's a long way to go. But I think they're one that I'm curious to see how they do in a way similar, like I said, to what Northwestern was last year. The last team I had in this group was Illinois. So John Gross, obviously on the hot seat, although I know he got a commitment from a big recruit that they had been trying to get for next year. So maybe that buys him a little time. This feels a lot like, I feel like I've heard this argument made a lot for IU football over the years of they pretty much have everybody back. They lost Kendrick Nunn, who got, I think suspended and then eventually transferred. But other than that, like, everybody's back. Now, this is where the IU football argument comes in. It would be like, well, the defense has almost everybody back. Well, if you have almost everybody back from a team that really wasn't very good, is that a good thing or a bad thing? And that's kind of where, I came down in Illinois. While it's great they have these guys back, what have they really done to say having them back is going to be a good thing? So, does that even matter to you? And I guess maybe more than that, they really didn't have an inside presence at all a year ago. Thorne got injured early in the season, and they really don't have a lot of size. Do you see that changing this year, and they can get to be a little more balanced versus, being as perimeter oriented as they were last year?
Yeah, there's a lot of questions here because they're getting Mike Thorne back. He got, I think, a sixth year, I want to say, of eligibility, so he's going to
Yeah, that's
be
right.
able to play. When he played last year, he actually wasn't a bad player. He gives them a more traditional post presence rather than Maverick Morgan, who's really just a kind of a big guy that likes to shoot on the perimeter and kind of force him to that spot. And they're also getting LaRon Black back after his, I think, suspension for the first 4 or 6 games next season. He's another guy who was kind of showed some promise his first year and then was injured. I think for the majority of last year, sat out. So those are 2 potentially impactful front court pieces that they bring back. And they also bring back Tracy Abrams potentially if he can stay healthy, because he sat out the last 2 years with an injury. And then they lost Khalil Lewis, who was a point guard, but they brought in Tijon Lucas, who I think is the top 150 point guard recruit. So that should be an upgrade there. So overall, the Nunn loss hurts a little bit for me because I thought he was one of their more dynamic, versatile playmakers. If Jalen Coleman-Lands can make a nice jump as far as being a good perimeter scorer, Malcolm Hill is still one of the best players in the Big Ten. I think there's some pieces here to be better for Illinois. And you mentioned the recruit that they got, Jeremiah Tillman, who's a borderline 5-star big man that Illinois got to commit for the class of 2017. It's going to be a tough call for Illinois. They're going to have, I feel like maybe an NIT season, and at that point, is that going to be enough to save John Gross with a recruit like that coming in? I feel like it might be, but they're a team that I kind of want to wait and see how Thorne and Black come back from the respective injuries. If Tracy Abrams is healthy, if he is, they're a team that maybe could be a little bit of a surprise in my eyes.
Yeah, they're a team a lot like Minnesota I mentioned earlier, where I think the range of outcomes is pretty wide, probably among the widest in the league. As you look through that, I also I forget who it was last night that was tweeting out some things about Malcolm Hill playing really well. One of the camps that is going on now, so he's certainly got to watch.
Nike Skills Academy out in LA.
Okay. Yeah, I think it was Dan Wolken maybe. I'm not sure who it was, but I saw a few things about how well he was playing at least last night. So a positive sign for them. So next is kind of, the next tier I feel like is kind of only Iowa to me. I did lump Ohio State in. Iowa's an odd team to me. I see them getting included in some, way too early preseason bracketology. I've, seen them mentioned, but when you really look at the roster, they have Peter Jock, who's, back. Dom Ewell played some, Nicholas Baer played a little bit, but it's really Peter Jack and a lot of new guys coming in. Nobody outside of Tyler Cook overly highly rated when you look at it from a recruiting standpoint. So they lost, Utah, Woodbury, Gasell, Clemens. Do you think they have the pieces to replace that? To me, there's like 2 questions. One of them, do they have the pieces to replace those guys? The answer to that is probably no. Maybe the better question is, is there enough there to kind of keep the wheels on? They're going to fall off, but how big is that drop off going to be from last year to this year?
I mean, the wheels didn't even stay on last year, and they had 4 seniors. I mean, it was like this was a team that, correct me if I'm wrong, at one point you probably had on the 1 or 2 line of a bracketology. And
I don't like to talk about that, but that may be accurate at some point.
Well, they completely torpedoed, and I don't know if it was Fran McCaffrey. I don't know if it was the players. I don't know if it was a combination of the 2 things. But as you said, I mean, Peter Jock's really their only notable returning player. You're making a lot of assumptions on other guys replacing production to even think that they're going to sniff the tournament. I had them 9th in my Big Ten power rankings. If I were to redo them at this point, I may even put them a little bit further down because overall their upside to me just isn't. You don't really know who the point guard's going to be. You don't have a great big man. You got Peter Jock. I mean, is Peter Jock going to go out and score 25 a game? I mean, none of these other guys have really proven that they can be reliable contributors with more minutes at the Big Ten level. So Iowa, to me, has got a ton of question marks. They're a team that, if a guy like Ahmad Wagner kind of comes on and has a really good season, could be a team that is decent in the Big Ten, but I also feel like they have a chance to finish 10th or 11th. That's kind of how I see them going at this point.
Yeah, so Ohio State was who I had up next. They've got their top 6 scorers back, so I think that's a positive. I think their Big Ten record was a little bit inflated last year based on how their schedule played out. I mean, when it really came down to it, they hadn't lost to many, if any, teams they shouldn't have lost to, but they also really hadn't beaten anybody either. So, again, it's kind of that question of, is it great to have this many guys back? Outside shooting is a concern. They don't have a ton of height on the roster, although the addition of Derek Funderburk helps with that a bit as a freshman. But they had some pretty big issues last year in 2-point shooting and offensive rebounding. Do you think Funderburk really helps that all that much, or how do you see them improving on their areas of weakness from last year, and is that enough to get them back in the tournament?
I would say no on getting back to the tournament, unless, to me, kind of the X factor for them is Jayshawn Tate. He was kind of so up and down, injured last year. He's kind of have to come back and have a big year. But their front court, like you said, I mean, Funderburk is obviously going to get minutes from the get-go. But they've got, Trevor Thompson as their primary big man. To me, I saw a lot of Amir Williams in him last year. I wasn't overly impressed.
You're going Rothstein on us now. So much Amir Williams and
that's not a Rothstein's usually complimenting guys. I'm putting somebody down when I compare them to Amir Williams. But to me, it's just like Jaquan Lyle too is a talented player, but is he like a Big Ten level point guard that you want with the ball in your hands in a close half court game? I'm going to argue no. For them, it's just a weird mix of players. I mean, you've still got Mark Loving around, who to me has some of the worst body language I've seen out of any Big Ten player. Keita Bates-Diop is another guy that they have who's long and can play the 4, can score and rebound a little bit, but they've got a lot of question marks for me. They don't have a lot of depth, and I just don't really see them, like the things that you talked about, them needing to improve on. I don't really see a clear path on how they're going to get better at either of those things.
Yeah, I think the other thing with Lyle as I was looking through rosters and looking at some of those, I mean, you start talking about advanced stats. His usage rate was extremely high. I think the highest on the team, but he was really inefficient. That's one of the things. How much does some of these, the best thing about freshmen is that they become sophomores, has been said before, but it's kind of the question of how does he evolve year over year, kind of take some of the bad, inefficient parts out of his game and get better, because if it's anything like last year, he's going to have the ball in his hands a lot. Probably remains to be seen whether that ends up being a good thing for them in the long run.
Yeah, and he's not a good shooter. I mean, he's never been a good shooter, and I don't necessarily think that's going to be a thing that he worked on or improved a lot in the offseason. I've heard he's in a little bit better shape, which should help him, but they're another team that just doesn't have, to me, a lot of great shooting. I mean, they got Cam Williams, I think, still sticking around there. But other than that, there's no, to me, I mean, Mark Loving can shoot a little bit, Bates-Diop, but, shooting rules, at the elite levels of college basketball, and Ohio State they don't, to me, have kind of what they're going to need to move into that upper tier of the Big Ten.
All right, so speaking of that upper tier, we're not quite there yet, but let's move into Andy Bottom's official second tier of the Big Ten here, and let's talk about Maryland. I mean, just taking a look at them, their schedule is like super favorable. I mean, which is good for them. I mean, given the losses of Stone, Carter, Lehman, and Solomon, and Trimble, he's the only guy back who is over like 5.4 points per game. And so I'm wondering, do you think that the pieces are there for him to bounce back with freshman Kevin Herter coming back and DeMonte Dodd getting into like a bigger role this season?
Yeah, I'm actually buying Maryland as maybe being higher than the second tier in terms of the final standings of the conference, because of what you mentioned with the schedule. They've got a really favorable schedule. When I kind of looked at the top 8 teams and projected kind of the schedules for next season, they had the easiest. I like Trimble to bounce back. There was something I didn't like last year about Suleiman. I don't know exactly what it was. It just kind of felt like a weird fit. I felt like Trimble wasn't healthy either all the season. I think he kind of battled some nagging injuries. I like Kevin Herter a lot. He's a top 50, top 60 kid that can really shoot. He's got some size. They added another point guard, Anthony Cowan, that can play some backup, maybe play a little bit next to Trimble. And then don't forget they have Dion Wiley, who was pretty good as a freshman off the bench coming back from injury. They got Jared Nickens, another guy that can stretch the floor and shoot threes. And then up front they've got DeMonte Dodd and Macau. I don't know how this. I always mess up his last name, but
I think it's Sikovsky.
There you go. There you go.
Well, that's how I'm gonna say it. I don't know if that's how you do say it, but that's how I will say it.
Yeah. Overall, I just think they've got a pretty talented roster. You know, I wasn't necessarily a huge Diamond Stone fan either. I don't feel like he was necessarily a guy that really cared too much. I don't want to throw the guy under the bus, but it was pretty much determined before he went to Maryland that it was a one-year stop for him. So he didn't really have a lot invested in seeing the program succeed. So obviously Layman's a loss, but I think they can kind of overcome the losses of Suleiman and Layman. And I think it was a mistake for Robert Carter, obviously, to go pro. They could have used him this year, but overall, I'm not really too down on Maryland for next year. I think they've got a chance to actually contend and be one of the top teams in the Big Ten with a favorable schedule. And I am kind of buying a bounce back season from Melo Trimble. It's interesting. Every year we go through this exercise. Me and Dylan Burkhart of Hoops, we kind of try to rank our top 25 Big Ten players. And as I was looking through the list in preparation for that, Melo Trimble to me was one of the most fascinating ones because last year, he would have easily been in my top 3, but now I'm wondering, with the opportunity he has this year at Maryland, is he a guy that I'm going to want to put up there again and kind of buy him as a stock as a guy who could potentially bounce back?
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see. I mean, he's one where there is a lot on his shoulders because there really isn't a lot of sure things coming back for sure. And one of the things that was talked about so much last year is why weren't they better than what they were, and the pieces they had just maybe didn't fit together as well as everybody thought they would with having to try to play, all 3 of Stone, Carter, and Layman at the same time. Well, now you've kind of gone to the other extreme of that of you've got a lot of flexibility because it's not, obvious who's gonna be there. I think the big questions for me are, up front, how does Dodd do in a bigger role? They've got LG Gill coming in from Maryland, so he'll help a little bit in that regard as well. I think I said from Maryland. That's not where he's from. But
Duquesne. He's he transferred from Duquesne. Okay.
And so those things will be interesting. I think they'll still be pretty good on the perimeter. It's just a matter of how Trimble can bounce back, but maybe his role is a bit more clear this year, and there are fewer guys that he feels like as the point guard he has to keep happy, and maybe that helps a little bit.
Yeah, I think there's a chemistry potential there for things to be better this year. I think it says something that some of those other guys left and he came back. It may tell you that he's got some closer friends on the team, maybe in Wiley and Nickens, that are kind of came in with him that he wanted to play another year with. Obviously his NBA future was a little bit uncertain, but he's definitely a guy that could have probably got a D-League invite or something similar to what Troy Williams got if he would have went. So, I think he feels like he's got something to prove. He was the preseason Big Ten Player of the Year last year. Let's not forget, how good he was as a freshman. Really good at drawing fouls. So, I'm maybe a little bit higher on Maryland than most, but with that favorable schedule and I feel like a really good point guard, they've got a chance to contend in the league.
All right, so moving on to Michigan, guys. Last season they got used to playing without LeVert, so that loss is going to be mitigated to some extent. But the questions still surround the team, including how much better can their three-point shooting get, and then whether or not Donnell and Wagner can continue to progress and provide a presence in the front line. Alex, what do you think?
Yeah, Michigan's an interesting team for me because they kind of, obviously saved their season at IU's expense in the Big Ten tournament, and then I think won one of the playing game. I think it was in the NCAA tournament. I think they won one of those the first 4 games and then actually lost to Notre Dame. So they were, to me, a bit of a disappointment last year, but most of that was based off the fact that they were never a complete team with LeVert being out, and then they kind of had to adjust to him being on the sidelines. This year, they've got to have Derek Walton healthy. I feel like he's kind of has to be the guy for them. They've got some nice perimeter guys though. Muhammad Ali Abdur-Rahman, Duncan Robinson, who was a really good three-point shooter the first half of the season, then kind of faded off. And then you've also got who's the other? Xavier Simpson, a top 50 guy that's coming in as a point guard recruit. So they've got a nice perimeter core. I think Mark Donnell is one of the more underrated guys in the Big Ten as far as the front court goes. So they're a team that I'm looking at probably finishing somewhere there in that top 6. They've got a tougher schedule though. Looking at kind of who they play next year, I had it pulled up here. It's not loading anymore now, but they're right there near the top as far as the schedule difficulty goes. So it's going to be, I think, an NCAA tournament team from Michigan, but they've got to really shore up their front court, as you mentioned, and then make sure Derek Walton's healthy because they're going to need him to run the point.
Yeah, I think you hit on probably all the key points there, so we won't linger on them too much. So Purdue is who I had up next. This kind of starts the top tier. I think there are kind of 3 big questions, so I'll pitch these to you one at a time because I think for them things pretty much boil down to these few questions. So the first is one we've asked about Purdue. It seems like for the past few years now is what happens at point guard with them. You know, they got Spike Albrecht in the mix. Carson Edwards is really the lone freshman they've got in their recruiting class. So how do they, for as much as people didn't really love Johnny Hill there last year, and some of their stopgap solutions at point guard these last couple seasons. How do you think that position shakes out for Purdue?
Well, they've got 2 probably better options with Edwards and Spike Albrecht if he's healthy. I mean, the amazing thing to me about Purdue is they had A.J. Hammonds for 4 years, didn't win an NCAA tournament game with him, and didn't really find a competent point guard in any of those 4 years to put on the court with him. That's pretty unfortunate for if you're a Purdue fan that your program was unable to do that. That said, I feel like this might be their best chance to have a pretty solid point guard. Edwards comes in with pretty good credentials, a top 100, top 150-ish type guy, and then you've got Spike Albrecht, who, by all accounts, ahead of I think they're taking a foreign trip to Spain, has been getting some pretty favorable reviews of his health. So I think they've got a chance there at point guard to be better than what they have been in the past. They don't even need to be great there. They just need to be good to average based on what they have at the 3, 4, and 5. They could potentially have a nice team.
So similar to what we talked about with, how does Jaquan Lyle progress from, year 1 to year 2? Big question for Purdue is Caleb Swanigan. So some of the same comments you can make about Lyle. He took some, Swanigan at key times took some questionable shots and at times really seemed to try to over-assert himself. What do you look for from him as a sophomore and kind of maturing after his first year in college?
Yeah, he's got to become more efficient. I mean, he's, like you said, took some terrible shots, wasn't a great finisher. I was looking kind of at the post-up numbers last year, and that post that earlier today that kind of focused on Thomas Bryant, but his numbers from efficiency standpoint in the post were just not good. I mean, he was playing alongside A.J. Hammonds and Isaac Haas. How can you not get great, easy looks in that situation? So to me, he's got to make better decisions and become a lot more efficient. I mean, he's gonna land on some of these like preseason all Big Ten first team lists, and I'm not buying that at all based on what I saw last year. I just, to me, he's Purdue's 3rd best player right now in my mind. So, I think there was a lot made of him coming in as a McDonald's All-American, 5-star recruit, had the Kentucky offer, but he just didn't really live up to the billing to me for me last season.
All right, and then the third question is around Isaac Haas. As you mentioned, Hammonds is finally gone. Haas has put up great numbers these last couple of years, but in limited minutes, so he's obviously going to get the chance to play a whole lot more in this coming year. Do you think he can maintain his level of production and efficiency in an expanded role?
Yeah, I mean, if he can play 20 to 22 minutes a game, that's pretty much going to be all they're going to need out of him. He's never played with Hammond, so it's not like he was benefiting at all from being, playing alongside another good post player. So they're going to need him to do a better job of staying out of foul trouble and essentially improving his conditioning, because he's a guy I think has a professional future someday if he can just he's a really good finisher around the rim, good efficiency in the post, but he's got to be able to limit his fouling and prove that he's in better shape. So I actually like Haas quite a bit. Probably would have him somewhere maybe in my top 15 Big Ten players going into next season, just based on the fact that there's not too many dominant big men that you can throw the ball into like him and pretty much count on the fact that he's going to either score or get fouled in most situations.
All right, so given where we are in time, I'm going to hit one quick IU question here in a second, but one quick reminder before we start talking about next season. For those who don't know, our book about last season, Better Than Advertised, is available on Amazon now and is already shipping, I believe. So assemblycall.com/book if you want to go check that out, purchase that, relive a great season last year before we get too far into this upcoming season. But so, Alex, question for IU. We talked a little bit about non-conference schedule. Let's talk about conference schedule. You talked about Maryland really being the easiest one by, I feel like, a pretty wide margin, quite honestly. Just give everybody a quick idea of where you had IU's Big Ten schedule ranked in relation to the other top teams.
Actually, I was just trying to pull that link back up to give myself a bit of a refresher here. Where did I have them ranked? Do you have that up?
I think you had them in the middle of the pack. You had them fourth of the. I think you looked at 8. They were fourth out of 8, so they're right middle of the road.
Yeah, so not as favorable as last season. The highlights for me of the schedule. They go to Maryland, which is a pretty tough place to play. They go to Minnesota, which hasn't always been easy. Go to Iowa, which they won there last year, but that's never easy. The double plays to me, is the tough part. I mean, they've got Michigan, Purdue, and Wisconsin all twice. You feel like if they can maybe go 4-2 in that stretch, that would be a pretty good job of those out of those 6 games. And then the home single plays are it's nice to not have to go to Michigan State, but like you said, I had them right in the middle of the pack. Not as favorable schedule as last year, so a little bit tougher, but definitely not nearly the toughest schedule in the league. And kind of one thing, looking back at last year's post when I did the most favorable schedules, I had Indiana as the second easiest last year. Michigan State was actually the easiest. And when you kind of looked at the strength of schedule, I think at the end of the season, even on Ken Palm, they ended up being the easiest. So, that's one reason I'm kind of high on Maryland, because I feel like now with this unbalanced schedule, it makes a huge deal, especially if the conference is going to be decided by one game. I don't feel like this year there's necessarily going to be a dominant team in the Big Ten, so I feel like this thing is going to be decided maybe a little bit by the schedule. So for Indiana to kind of be in the middle of the pack, I feel like it still gives them a chance to win the league.
Yeah, you touched on Maryland. I meant to bring this up when we had Maryland. So if we figure the top 6 teams that I have, Maryland is one of those. So, the other 5 teams in that top 6, they play each of them only once, with 3 of those games at home and 2 on the road. So when we talk about, being drastically easier than everybody else, that's the kind of thing that we're talking about.
All right, so guys, let's move on to Wisconsin. I mean, last season they went to the Sweet 16, and 2 years before that, I believe they both went to the Elite Eight both of those years. So this season, they're returning all but 6 points, 5 rebounds, and 1 block from last year's team, including all the assists and steals are coming back. So my question is for you, what can go wrong with so much talent on this roster, and do you see them making their 5th Sweet 16 in 6 years?
Andy, are we really going to let him off the hook by saying that Wisconsin went to the Elite Eight 2 years ago when they did the deed in the Final Four, beating Kentucky, ending the unbeaten season 2 years ago?
Yeah,
so
wow.
I don't think we can. I also have residual bitterness from that, because I could have won a decent amount of money in a tournament pool had they won the national championship. So while they did help in that regard, I'll never forgive them for not winning the title. But yeah, we can't let that go. We can't let that go unmentioned for sure.
You would have won money if Wisconsin would have won. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Okay. I had picked them in my pool. So in addition to them, it felt wrong to have to put myself in a position to root for them. But
I was just making sure that you weren't saying that you had money on Kentucky winning, because in that case I would have gladly written you a check. in that instance.
No, dear God, no. That would never happen. That would
Okay.
never happen. All right. On
Oh,
to this season, Alex. On to this season.
Wisconsin. Okay, quickly. They've got everyone back of note. Um, Nigel Hayes is going to have to be better than he was last year because he was very inefficient based on his usage. But to me, they're the clear-cut favorite potentially. It's hard to say. I think right now they're my favorite to win the league. I've kind of flip-flopped on this. I've liked Michigan State. I've liked Wisconsin, but right now I'd say Wisconsin's the favorite to win the league based on what they have coming back. I'll keep it brief.
Yeah, it's interesting. I kind of had the same debate as you just mentioned with the two of them because they and Michigan State, who we'll get to in a second, it's like they're polar opposites in some regard. Michigan State is going to rely so much on newcomers, albeit ones who are really highly regarded, and one of the better recruiting classes that Izzo has probably ever had. But at the same time, we kind of know what you're going to get from Wisconsin and a team, full of guys who played last year, played well. The only question I really had, and I don't know that any of us will be able to answer this, is just what role some of the emotion of last season, Bo Ryan leaving, what role did that play in turning around? But I think it's hard to bet against them based on the track record, based on the guys they have coming back, where at least they're more known commodities than there are for Michigan State. So I tend to fall in the same camp where it feels like they're the favorite, but. I guess that's as good a segue as any to Michigan State. So they are, by a lot of people, if you look at, preseason top 25s and things like that, they have IU, Wisconsin, and pretty closely bunched together with Michigan State and Wisconsin tending to be, the top there. As I mentioned, they're going to be heavily reliant on freshmen. I know two of your five, newcomers to watch in the Big Ten were from there. They've got, top five, I think maybe even top three recruiting class, but they lost a ton. Four of their top five scorers, top three rebounders. And so the only upperclassmen that are really around who played a major role is, Aaron Harris. Question, he was good in a complementary role next year. Can he really, can he do more than that? They've got UNLV transfer Ben Carter, who's kind of a do-it-all glue type guy. But how do you? I guess the question there is, how do you see all these pieces fitting together there with newcomers who are certainly going to, have the talent to warrant playing a lot of minutes, but also mixing in with a handful of veteran guys who haven't had, didn't have a ton of statistical success last year, but at least have been in the program. Like, how does that all come together in your mind? It's certainly easy to say with Tom Izzo, you're going to trust him no matter what, but how do you see that all, coming together for them?
Yeah, I don't necessarily think it's going to be pretty from day one, but I think by the end of the season it's going to be a pretty nice finished product. Josh Langford's a really good point guard actually a combo guard, can play either spot, really good shooter. And then Miles Bridges is just an elite wing player that can score, might be their best player from day one, could be a first-team All-Big Ten player as a freshman. That's how good he is. I've seen him a lot in the AAU circuit. The other thing, you touched on most of the pertinent points of Michigan State, but one other thing to watch is they're still in the mix for Andrew White. They're one of the finalists, I believe, for him. So if he ends up going to Michigan State, I think that gives them a veteran kind of on the wing that can score, just another scoring option. But it's going to take some time with Michigan State. We've seen in years past where Izzo's kind of had to break a team down and then build it back up by the end of the season. And I think with some of these freshmen, he's going to have to kind of do that a little bit. But by the end of the year, they'll I feel like have a chance to be a Sweet 16, Elite 8 type team, maybe a Final Four team. It's just so hard to say, given kind of what happened last year with them in the tournament. Everyone thought they were going to win it all, and then they kind of just crumbled there in the first round. But overall, they're bringing in 4 top 40 recruits, have a solid returning core of rotation players back, and then the potential of Andrew White plus Izzo, I think, gives them a chance to have a pretty nice upside.
All right, well, we made it through, everybody. Probably not as much Rutgers talk as we'd all hoped, but we got it in about an hour, so that's a positive. Alex, just real quick, what do you have coming up next on the site as you kind of move your way through the off season?
Well, I got vacation coming up in a couple weeks, so no, I'm just kidding. Like I said, we'll be doing the top 25 Big Ten players at some point here soon. Just started to work on that. That's always fun. To look back after the season at the ones we screwed up completely. And then we'll, kind of dig into a lot of the preseason content here not too long from now. In September, we'll kind of go through all the Big Ten teams one by one, do the IU player profiles, and before you know it, Hoosier Hysteria will be here. Hopefully you guys can make it down this year to another game, and we can do another meetup. I think that'd be a lot of fun. So looking forward to another season. Enjoy your guys' show, your coverage, and thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
All right, thanks a lot for coming. We are definitely planning another meetup next year. I know I'm looking forward to it. Had a really good time meeting everybody. So we'll definitely plan the second annual Assembly Call meetup for sure at some point this season. So that'll do it for us. Really, not much to wrap up with. I checked one last time. No baby updates from Jared, so nothing to pass along in that regard. But definitely look forward to having him back here in a couple weeks, back in the host chair as we work our way through the off season. But good to get together with everybody, with Alex, you, and Will, and talk some early look at Big Ten basketball next season. I'm sadly starting to put together some at least thoughts around bracketology and some of these smaller conferences. So I think, like most Hoosier fans, I've still got the itch to see some basketball, and can't wait for Hoosier Hysteria in the season to start. So with that, we'll wrap things up. Thanks again to Alex for coming on. Thanks for Will for joining us tonight, and we'll be back in 2 weeks with another edition of the Assembly Call. Thanks, everybody.